Meeting. We're being asked to have a moment's silence on Sunday night. What I think would be appropriate is if we just stand for a few moments of reflection. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. There has been discussion this morning about whether this meeting is right to go ahead. I know there's been all sorts of discussion at various levels of local government. As I understand it, the arrangements in parish and districts and boroughs is that, well, certainly in parishes, they're being asked not to have meetings or to send agendas out during the period of mourning. But as far as the London Bridge is concerned, the guidance that we've had is that at county level meetings that are planned can go ahead. And when you bear in mind that London Bridge is a document that was produced some years ago, would have had the input from the palace quite strongly in its input, I think the fact that we're going ahead is the right thing to do. We'll start with apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillors Davies and Francis.
Thank you.
Can you add Councillor Oates to that, because he's in a meeting with senior management this morning?
Any other apologies? Right, we'll go to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Take that as a no. Item 3 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of August 22. Any comments or adjustments, alterations necessary on those? No? I will sign those as a true record. That brings us to item 4, which is Governance of Outside Bodies Partnerships Review. It's down on the agenda as the Director of Corporate Services, who you might or might not know is poorly at the moment. So unfortunately, we don't have John Tradewell. We do have Kate Loader, though, who's the solicitor for the authority. Kate, are you leading off on this report? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Thank you. In relation to this report, it is a short and self-explanatory report. However, I welcome the input and guidance and discussion of this report today to ensure that the report, as we propose for it to be presented back in December, is fully formulated and in line with members' wishes. If I may, I will take any questions in relation to the brief report as presented. However, there has been a further meeting of the Corporate Governance Working Subgroup since the report was submitted, and if I may, I will simply update on the further actions which do not differ from the recommendations and pathway already set out within the report, but I can update in terms of we now have a trainee solicitor appointed who will be doing the piece of work to gather articles of association in terms of reference from limited companies. We have now engaged with audit. We have Deborah Harris, who is part of the subgroup now in place of Lisa Andrews, who you'll be aware is unfortunately unwell. And part of the work is we are going to be undertaking a review of an audit already done on one LATCO company, and using that as a test piece. Mr. Eberly and I are going to be reviewing the list of outside bodies It's a list which runs to 120 outside bodies at the moment that members have involvement with a review to understanding the scope and involvement of members in those 120 bodies listed. And then finally, we will be looking at a process. You will see within the report we indicate that it's been quite difficult to find out how many companies we have. So we are looking at a process to make sure that when companies are set up, they follow a process, and fundamentally also to ensure that there is a register of companies going forwards, which will give us more assurance in relation to the governance of the companies. Thank you, Chair. That's the work and an update from the report as presented. I'm happy to go through any aspects of the report as I've presented it, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Well, as you see in the report, this is a report to say that there's another report coming in December. We'll have more information there. So I think this is our opportunity. Those people who are involved in districts and boroughs might be able to assist on this, looking at how we might shape the look of the report that we have coming our way in December. I mean, for instance, there's reference in the pages that we've got here that it seems that there are few individuals involved on some of these relationships. We have to also determine the role of Audit and Standards Committee in terms of any monitoring that goes on in the governance. And as I think as Kate has said, one of the things that we don't see in front of us now is a list of organisations. And I personally think that's something that we might benefit from seeing. There's references to requiring articles of association, terms of references, recent minutes. But I think the first and foremost that we could do with this is a list of what are the LATCOs that we have a relationship with, and what are the other organisations that we might have partnerships with where we don't currently have visibility of that. So I think making that a bit more open and available would be very, very useful. I'm talking really from my experience of Lichfield District Council, which I know the leader is aware of, where we have a summary once a year, and it's quite simply, these are the organisations that we have some form of relationship with, these are the people who touch base with those organisations, and this is the remit of that organisation. So it doesn't need to be too complicated. For instance, Amy for highways infrastructure and developments, Entrust for provision of infrastructure into education services, that sort of thing, and who there are that we have within the organisation who might be the people that touch base with that. So I think that would be useful, but I'll open it up to anybody else who has comments to make. Councillor Worthington.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Chairman. I think for openness and transparency, I think what we know who we're involved with is very important. I think also I'd like to add that we could do with when these agreements are up, so we've got an end date so we know what's coming forward, if that's a possibility. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. We've had various discussions about the ones that I've mentioned already, the Amy's and the Entrust of the World and Nexus, and it is very pertinent to know when the review periods are, to know when is the best time to start looking at those organisations. Councillor Clements.
Thank you, Chair. I always welcome these reports because they're easy to read. I think after what's been said, we need to look at when they meet, and we also need to look at what is the benefit of each one to us as a county council. Because if they're not engaged with us and we've got no engagement with them, then what's the point? And I agree with you. The summary each year, it's a simple thing to do. We do it in Tomworth. You know, who's engaged with us, who isn't engaging with us, and what benefit do they bring to us as a council. So I think it's a really important report, and I welcome further comments.
Chair, thank you. Yes, I'll just echo the view about the easy read of the report. I think it's important, as you just pointed out there, to have an understanding of these companies. But I take it from the update that we had. For me, I think the most important thing is that we have a robust process in place, rather than an ad hoc view of companies that have a relationship with us, that we have this process whereby we are able or automatically able to make some of these considerations without having to create lists and various other things and have a subjective view of each one of them.
Thank you. Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. A couple of years ago on a district council, I did look at whether there was a benefit for that council to set up an energy company. And when I look at the outcomes from Robin Hood Energy, and not just Robin Hood, but also Bristol Energy, and I think Croydon were also involved in one, and lost millions. I always look back and think, thank goodness I was persuaded of my madness in that respect, that single respect, obviously. But I do think there is a need to be clear as to why we're involved with these sorts of organisations. To me, there's only two reasons. One is we can make excess profit, or we can make profit we can reinvest back in. Or the second one is because there is a need to intervene in the marketplace because something isn't happening that we need to happen for our residents. I guess the whole of this report sort of throws up a number of issues or a number of questions in my mind. One is obviously about the liabilities, and I guess that's probably why risk and audit are looking at this, because of the unforeseen liabilities that might be sitting there. And equally the risks that may be there as well, the unforeseen risks. But I would hope it was also looking at the benefits, so that we are clear in measuring not just risk, but also what potentially it does for us or for our residents ultimately. The other thing that sort of falls off the back of that is I think we also need to make sure that we have the most appropriate people involved with those LATCOs. And, you know, I look at boards, I sit on a number of them, both in a local authority capacity as well as in my own right, as well as in a commercial business right. And I think we need to make sure that the right skills are identified and the right people identified for those roles to make sure that we actually are suitably skilled up to add value to those boards and make sure the appropriate governance is happening. Because if you can't ensure the appropriate governance is happening, how can you ensure that the risk is managed at the same stage? I guess so I guess my first point is really about that sort of making a wider balance. I guess the other problem is the more you dig, the more you then might be tempted to put more governance into the structures of those LATCOs, and that creates more work, and then that in itself creates, you know, there is an acceptance that due diligence has been done. And so I wonder whether, you know, this report is a precursor to a smoking gun, or actually whether there is a different strategy that's involved with some of those LATCOs in terms of ensuring that they can still be fleet of foot and fulfil the purpose that they are there for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parry.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to pick up on the outside bodies bit of the governance, if I may, please. Obviously, we've had these outside bodies on for a long time now, and I sit on 2 or 3 in my division. Some are active and some aren't, and I find some of them very useful, particularly when it comes to residents' concerns. So I don't know where we are with that. So maybe we could have an outline of what our remit is on the outside bodies, if you know where, because I've had to call meetings myself with them, and to be fair, they've been very obliging. I'm talking about quarries and things now, where we do get a lot of residents' concerns. So maybe we could pick up on that at some point as well, if that's okay, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's going back to my point. What I've seen at district, the annual summary allows you to realise that certain organisations that haven't met since the last time it was circulated might not be in existence. So it's useful to have that summary. Councillor Atkins.
Yes, I think also it's important that we understand what our relationship with them is in terms of the terms of reference. I'm thinking particularly of district, I'm not going to name the company, where there's a sort of realisation that they're working to a contract or terms of reference, but actually on the ground, that's not being delivered. And I do think that we need to know whether they're working to a different terms of reference to the general understanding of what they're supposed to be doing. So that, you know, you've got the governance, but you've also got an understanding in terms of residents about what that company does for us, and that is transparent. Because I think very often you get a situation where it becomes sort of custom and practice that things are done or things aren't done. And I just think that we need to be absolutely clear because, you know, both to defend the company, but also to make sure that we're getting value for money from that particular company. So I think that's important if we're going to ensure that whatever company we're dealing with is regarded as it should be in terms of its actual performance to its terms of reference rather than what people think it might deliver.
The leader, Councillor Alan White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The points about the companies are well made. I just wanted to flag up the making sure that we are compliant with company law when we consider these issues. A member who is a director of a company has a fiduciary responsibility to the company under the Companies Act. That fiduciary responsibility can conflict with any decisions you may make as in your role as a councillor. So let's say, for example, the board has a meeting where it says, right, what we're going to do is slash the amount of effort we put into the council contract in order to maximise our profits and return for our shareholders. And we've got a councillor who's there who knows that that is going on. They then wind forward to the MTFS meeting. They know information that they have a responsibility to undertake the direction of travel of the company, but they also know that the council needs to save money as well, and therefore they find themselves in a very, very difficult situation, may be conflicted, and maybe we inadvertently put them into a place where they're in conflict of that fiduciary responsibility. And I think we do need to be mindful of that, and that's been in my mind quite a lot recently since we've had cabinet members who are directors of companies where decisions are being made, but they're also the decision makers for the presentation of reports to full council. On the outside bodies, those members who've been around for a while will recall that the outside bodies sheets went to about 15 to 20 pages. We had a good old cull of that because some of these things hadn't met for a long time. But new ones come up, old ones fade away, and I think it's really important that Staffordshire County Council is represented in places where it should be represented, and its voice is being heard on behalf of the people that we purport to look after. Because I don't have knowledge of the broader, what goes on in the broader county, that is to local members to start to feed into this piece of work, Mr. Chairman. And if it's possible, perhaps for this committee to appeal to members of council to come forward with anything that we ought to be involved with, then we can make it a duty, and they can get travel expenses to do that, and they would be appointed in the usual way at each annual council. So it's not just making sure we're represented, but it's also making sure that people's costs are covered for fulfilling that duty. It segues into the next item as well, which is how much work you have to do as a county councillor.
Okay, so I think in summary we recognise the value of these relationships, and as the leader just said, it's actually making the relationships known and working for us. I think the first point for me is to have that summary so we can actually see, particularly the LATCOs, they're obviously the ones that are going to have the greatest relationship. Councillor Worthington, you want to add something?
I just wanted to say, as a committee, can we just send our best wishes for recovery to John and to Lisa, if you wouldn't mind? That'd be okay.
Okay, thank you. So yes, we'll summarise for December, in particular, the detail of the LATCOs, and then from a visibility point of view, the other relationships we have and the other representations that we have, so that we can actually contribute our views about whether they're ones that we know are being productive or otherwise. So the more that we have in front of us in December, the better. Okay, any other comments around the table? No? We'll go on to item 6, and you'll see some similarities in terms of item 6 and item 7, whereas item 7 is our usual work programme. Sorry. You're quite right. Jumping ahead of myself. Yes, sorry, it's a presentation that we're having. Item 5 is the Boundaries Commission review. And again, we're missing the Director of Corporate Services. So is it Kate that's going to lead us on this? Oh, right, okay. The Boundaries team has just walked in. Right, so welcome to the meeting. We've just started it and the presentation is on screen. Who's going to take us through the presentation? Okay.
Who knew? Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I had prepared some notes in the event that you hadn't turned up. So, but now we've got the professional on board. That's a good job, isn't it? This is the opportunity for this committee, which is the gathering together of all the chairs of all the other committees, to have their view on our work so far. Therefore, it's very important that this committee has an input into this. There are opportunities for other informal groups to be being briefed. For the sake of transparency, the controlling group will be getting a briefing, and I've asked that the Labour group gets the same briefing. I've also asked for Kerry and Katie, and if you haven't met Katie before, welcome to Katie, to also make sure they try and track down some representative from the Liberal Democrats and the Greens as the 4 main parties in the county, so that they're part of this work should they wish to be. For members who've been around for a while, again, you'll recall the last time we did this was around 2010 in preparation for the 2013 elections. And this is our turn. There have been some demographic shifts. As you know, districts and boroughs have grown and changed shape, so therefore we need to look at the size and shape of the representation that we have across the county. This work is being done in preparation for the 2025 elections. The first phase is the gathering of data. Now, it's tempting, and I know I can name certain councillors who will drift into this, the desire to say that, oh, I'd like to have Acacia Avenue in my division. They say, well, we're not there yet. Okay, what we're doing is we're just looking at the lie of the land, seeing what the numbers look like, looking at the number of councillors, and seeing whether or not we have sufficient councillors to undertake the work that we have. I've had the opportunity to meet with the Electoral Commission on local LBCE, whatever they're called, on 2 occasions, the Chair and the Chief Executive. We as councillors have had the opportunity to have a briefing from them, and I know that many of you were in attendance at that briefing. The process is really clearly set out. It's not overly complicated, but there is quite a lot of work that goes on in it. Goes on with it. The districts and boroughs feed a lot of information into Kerry and Katie, which they have to then process through to present to the Commission. When I was asked about this at the start, we talked about councillor numbers, and my view at the time when I had the initial meeting was, with 62 councillors, any fewer than 62 would make conducting the business of the council quite difficult. So that was me sort of saying to the Commission, okay, well, you know, when you do your review, I can't see it being less than 62. We've got 4 scrutiny committees, we've got a large number of regulatory committees, and if you're in the position of trying to fill those committees with councillors, some of whom have other interests and are a bit reluctant to put their shoulders to the wheel, some of whom aren't well, so it does make it quite challenging to fill some of those committee slots to do the work that we need. And you as the chairs of the committees know full well what your workload looks like and whether or not your committee needs to exist. But this is all up for grabs during the course of this. So that's where we come from. I think what I'm going to do now, having probably stolen a good chunk of your thunder because I wasn't 100% sure you'd be here, I'll hand over to Kerry to take you through what remains of her presentation and the thunder that I have stolen.
Thank you, Lee, and good morning, everyone. So as the leader has just outlined, the Boundary Commission have initiated a review, and obviously this committee have had a number of verbal updates on the progress over the last few months. There are two key stages in an electoral review. Stage 1, which considers council size, and Stage 2, which then looks at the detailed division arrangements. We are currently in Stage 1. We are required to submit a council size submission by the 11th of November, and alongside that submission we're also required to submit a very long list of supplementary data and information that the Boundary Commission requires. Looking ahead, Stage 2 will commence in January once the Boundary Commission has published its in-principle decision on council size, and I think it is important to stress that it will be a in-principle decision. The Commission is then expected to publish its final division arrangements by November next year, with the new division arrangements live by 2025. This next slide just summarises how the submission has been drafted. As the leaders outlined, a significant information has been collated from the district and boroughs, and we've been working with them to both QA, quality assure the data, and put in the right checks and balances. When considering council size, the Commission considers three key aspects. They are strategic leadership, so how many elected members are required to give strategic leadership and direction to the authority. Accountability, how many elected members are required to provide scrutiny to the authority and are required to meet the regulatory requirements of the authority. And community leadership, how the representation role of elected members in the local community is discharged and how they engage with people and conduct casework. The Commission expects council size proposals to be a balance across three aspects, so no one aspect is given greater weight over the other. I think it's also really important to note that the Commission recognises that there is considerable variation in council size across the country, and that's even amongst the same type of authority. So between different county councils there is a lot of variation in council size. Therefore, they very much focus on what is the most appropriate council size for each local authority. A key element and piece of information that the Boundary Commission require during Stage 1 is a set of electoral forecasts for the whole county up to 2028. We have worked really closely with our district and boroughs to produce these forecasts for all polling districts, existing divisions, and then aggregating up to district and borough level. We've used the recommended Commission methodology, which projects forward by looking at the numbers on the electoral register for the last 3 years, and then it uses Office for National Statistics population data to project forward to 2028. We also then add a local adjustment to reflect confirmed housing development that is likely to impact the electorate across the county between 2022 and 2028. I think it's really important to stress these forecasts need to be our best estimate based on evidence that we have available to us. All forecasts and projections are based on assumptions, and projections are obviously using the past to try and predict the future. Therefore, we just need to be mindful of, like I say, they need to be our best estimate. All forecasts bar Lichfields are complete. We're just working with the district council there to confirm the likely status of several potential major developments by 2028. So the forecast for this district may therefore be subject to some change over the next week or so prior to that final submission, but we're not expecting a significant change. This slide just summarises those district electoral forecasts, and the detail of this is within the report, including a breakdown of the electoral forecasts by existing divisions. So moving on to the council size proposal, we are proposing that the County Council retains the current council size of 62 elected members, and that we request a single member per division review. Alternative council sizes have been considered, and the Boundary Commission are very keen to see that we've considered that through our submission, which you will see in the document. whilst we are proposing to request a single member review, it's just a note of caution, I think, that we discussed previously, that whilst we can request it, it doesn't guarantee that the final recommendations will be able to achieve it. We made that same request back in 2010, however, 2 dual divisions did remain. This slide just briefly summarises the evidence that we've considered for either reducing or increasing our council size. There is little evidence to support a reduction in size. We already have a higher than average elector to member ratio in the county when we compare ourselves to our SITFA statistical neighbours. And as the leader has outlined, any reduction would also significantly impact on the day-to-day running of the council and being able to fill committee role and regulatory responsibilities. Looking at an increase in council size, whilst that could support improved community representation, if we were to have a meaningful impact on reducing the county's elector to member ratio across the county, we'd be looking at a council size of between 70 to 80 elected members. That would obviously have a significant increase on the cost of democracy and also present significant challenges in being able to develop division arrangements for that many elected members and potentially produce some inefficiency within the council. Before opening up for comments and feedback from the committee, just a brief look ahead to both next steps and stage 2. So the submission is due to be considered by Cabinet on the 21st of September. It will then go through to full council on the 13th of October, with us looking to submit to the Commission by the 11th of November. So stage 2, so as previously outlined, we're expecting them to make that in-principle council size decision on the 10th of January. Ourselves and then any other interested parties will then have 12 weeks to submit our initial proposals for new division arrangements. And the criteria that the Boundary Commission are looking at in terms of new patterns of electoral divisions are that they address electoral equality, they represent community interests and identity, and that they also help to promote effective and convenient local government. Member input in pulling together those division proposals will be absolutely critical. We will be ensuring that there are regular briefing sessions arranged for all members to input into and shape those proposals. We'll also be looking to have individual meetings with elected members on specific division proposals, and obviously the suggestion is this committee continues to provide that vital scrutiny and oversight to the process. So that's a quick run through of the council size submission and that look ahead to stage 2. So open up for feedback and questions.
Thanks, Kerry. I'll start. I must admit this is one of my favourite subjects. I love number crunching exercises like these, and especially election numbers. I understand the principles behind the stage 1 being agreeing the numbers. However, having seen some of these examples before, quite often you come across an exercise where you're trying to allocate equality around the various divisions or wards, whatever it might be, and then find out, if I only hadn't picked that number to start with. Now, I'm thinking in relation to the non-one-member ward areas, and obviously it was refused the last time. Have you had forward visibility of those 2-member wards to look at what might be a solution, given that there might be 62 as the selected number? Or would you regret thinking in advance, I wish we'd gone for 63 or I wish we'd gone for 61?
Say it is slightly chicken and egg, this process, because ideally you'd start looking at the divisions first and then building up. But we are slightly bound by the process. And the Boundary Commission do recognise that, hence why they look to make an in-principle decision on the council size. There is a degree of flexibility in the number that gets announced. So, and we've had this conversation with the Boundary Commission, and again, they've clarified, if once when we get into the detail of working through the division arrangements, if actually there is a good case for, as you say, an additional member to either address the dual division issue or to address one of the districts that has a particular high variance above the Staffordshire, then they will absolutely consider that. So that in principle decision is not set in stone. There is that flexibility once we get into the detailed division arrangement consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Pert.
Thank you. I welcome the report. It's useful to see the data that supports it, and sometimes it allows you to scratch your head and think, oh, that explains why I never seem to have any time to do anything. And equally, it explains why you feel that you've got a lot of geography to cover, as well as a lot of residents to cover. Can I make 3 points? First of all, I think in demonstrating the role and the breadth of scrutiny, it might be useful to include part of the following report as an appendix, as part of the submission, because I think when you look at the forward work programme that is detailed in the following report, actually you can see the breadth that scrutiny plays. And I think it's a good practical demonstration of the impact. Secondly, I looked at one of the pieces of data, and it talks specifically, and just being a bit parochial, it talks very specifically about scrutinising the county council's directorates. And obviously health scrutinises wider than the county council's directorates, and I don't think it fairly represents the role and requirement of health scrutiny. Particularly as the health spend within the Staffordshire County Council's area, within Staffordshire, is probably in excess of £3 billion. So to ignore it, I think, is a mistake. Equally, it talks about statutory responsibilities. And just being a bit picky, I actually think that health does have a statutory requirement. I think it is laid down in law. So to only focus on planning and licensing, I think is also possibly a mistake, but maybe I'm just being a bit parochial.
Okay, point made. Is there any other comments? I wanted to make one other one about, Kerry, you used the word flexibility and adjustment as necessary when we get further down the line. Is it the case that it's plus or minus 10% variance from an average that would be allowed per division? And I'm thinking in particular, the other thing that I've mentioned before is coterminosity with district and borough boundaries.
Yes, the Boundary Commission's ideal scenario is that the new division arrangements, once we get to that point, allow all divisions to be within plus or minus 10% of the county average. So that is what we are aiming for when we get into stage 2. Coterminosity is something, again, that the Boundary Commission are really keen on. Obviously, our divisions will not go across district and borough boundaries, but they're also very keen, where we can, to ensure as much coterminosity with district and borough wards, and also parishes are another geography that the Boundary Commission take into consideration in terms of trying to ensure as much coterminosity as possible. But I think it is important to note at this point, there won't be a perfect answer to this. Unfortunately, it's highly likely that by the time we get to the final recommendations, those division arrangements won't be perfect for all different types of different scenario, and for every different type of element we'd ideally like them to cover. So I think it is important for us to acknowledge that at this point.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. Councillor White.
To develop Kerry's point there, a case to illustrate it is Keele. So the student population around Keele varies widely, and the numbers who register to vote in the Keele area is sometimes higher and sometimes lower. So it's very difficult to get an accurate fix on the numbers of voters that are likely to be in that particular division due to that fluid population. And particularly during the course of the pandemic, many of the students stayed registered at home, which meant that division's size dropped as a consequence. And then coming back to university, some are going to be registering at university. And you get student union groups, the student labour group, student conservative group, encouraging students to register where they are. So that's quite a challenging area. As far as the single member review is concerned, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make the point that if we didn't request it, this is the information I got, if we didn't request it, it wouldn't happen. So I felt, given the fact we had a single member review in 2010, that just tests, and I'm looking particularly at Councillor Perry on this, that just tests whether or not it's still appropriate to have a double member division, or whether or not circumstances have changed sufficiently for them to become two single member divisions. Now, putting a line down the middle of your division, Councillor Perry, could be quite difficult to make it sort of hang together reasonably. So I just wanted to make the point about the request for that. There's nothing sinister underneath that. It's just making sure that we've examined all the options in the process of bringing this forward, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions? Just one other one. You mentioned the consultees, other political parties not represented here. Are there other people being consulted in terms of the process?
We've also reached out to independent councillors as well to offer them a briefing. At this stage, we're not, the Boundary Commission aren't making this a public consultation. The public consultation element comes as part of stage 2. So this is very much the County Council needing to put our proposal forward. But obviously, as the leader has already outlined, we felt it was really important to ensure all parties had an opportunity to feed into this.
Say it's quite hard to find a leader of the Greens. Everybody seems to be a leader of the Greens.
Yes, clearly the way they're structured, they have lots of vice chairs and things. Councillor Charles Atkins.
I came across the leader of the Greens on a course once, and I think she was only there by acclamation at virtually every meeting. I don't think they really recognise that. But the question I wanted to ask is what impact, if any, will this review have on districts and boroughs? I mean, obviously the districts and boroughs are involved, but does the Commission then go on to have a look at boundaries at district, borough, and even indeed town and parish?
Again, I think the Boundary Commission would admit that ideally the rhythm of it should be that district and boroughs are done first and then the county comes at the end. However, that isn't always practical, and it hasn't been practical in our current situation. So a number of our district and boroughs have either recently or actually are currently going through an electoral review. So South Staffs, I think in the last few months concluded those. I think Cannock is still in the thick of it. So unfortunately, the timing isn't ideal. The Boundary Commission are aware of that. And as such, when we get to our division arrangements, the Boundary Commission will work with us to ensure that we're using the latest version of district and borough boundaries, and will kind of play in if any of our district and boroughs are in the midst of a review, such as Cannock as well. So they do recognise it's not ideal, but they do try and line this up as much as possible, but it's yeah, unfortunately not always feasible.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Sorry. I'm not sure whether this applies or not, but the district, as you say, is going through it at the moment, Cannock is, and I do know that they want to extend my district area into the Hensford area. So it's taking some of the spacage and people off the actual double-seated area in Hensford. So I don't know how that will affect it in the long run. I just wanted to make you aware, sorry.
Thank you for that, and we will be, in particular with Cannock going through it at the moment, we'll be keeping a really close eye on that and making sure.
Yeah, tanks and everything.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a notion of caution, I think. We've just done now as at South Staffs, and it didn't go down very well with some members, can I say? So just a word of caution that some people won't be happy with the outcome of what district and boroughs are doing. So just thought I'd mention that. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Atkins raised the question of district and borough process. I happen to know this because I've got the scars from what happened in Lichfield. The periodic electoral review is an obligation on behalf of the districts and boroughs to have a review at a certain period. They're not all coinciding, so that's one of the problems, that they're not all happening at the same time. So convening them at the same time as the county is just impossible. And what makes it even worse is some authorities bring them forward, which is what happened in Lichfield. So you're planning on a certain date, and then somebody says, well, let's do it differently and bring it forward. Okay, any other questions? Right, can I thank Kerry for the presentation and Katie for your presence, and we'll look forward to further updates. Thank you. Councillor White?
Mr. Chairman, there are a couple of recommendations that we're asking you before it goes forward to Cabinet. If we could just take your views on that, whether or not your comments about retention of the 62 and requesting the single member per division. I've got to present this to Cabinet and I'm seeking your views as part of this process, please.
Well, unless I hear otherwise, I think nobody had any objection to 62. I think we heard your comment about workload. And certainly I think we've made some comments positively about the single member ward. So can I take it that that's the recommendation of this committee? Okay, thank you. Councillor Pert?
I obviously don't disagree with that, but in terms of the detail, presumably you'll just take on board the comments I've made, rather than just pass them through.
Yes, they will be in the minutes, but in terms of the recommendations, yes to 62 and yes to single member wards. Okay, we'll go on to item 6, which is the ONS work programme by way of update. You'll see that the structure of the report is to look at the 4 overview and scrutiny committees and look at if the balance is correct. Just to highlight that we do also have a coordinating group between the chairs and vice chairs, and the next meeting of that group is due to be on the 22nd of September. So certainly anything in relation to any duplications that we might see or any issues that we might see would be picked up at that particular point. But that's not to say that we can't raise them here. In terms of the report, it starts with a focus on Q2. It then goes on to look at some of the things that might be potential for cross-committee working, and further on we get discussions of things that might need further work, more contained in the next agenda item. But as far as the focus is required on each forthcoming quarter, if I can just mention what I see as being the focus for Q2, picking up from the report for corporate review, and I'll invite other chairs of committees to bring up anything they want to. Certainly as far as Q2 is concerned for this particular committee, you've just had the discussion in the Boundaries Commission. We're also going to be looking at corporate complaints. We've got the LGSO annual report to field, and we're also looking at Entrust changes. My Vice Chair will be bringing forward the final report of the working group on climate change, and of course we'll also have, within the quarter, we'll look at the integrated performance review as we normally do every quarter. Anything that the Chair of Health would like to bring up? No? Okay, I see you've got adult social care as being a main thing, the reforms taking place there. Councillor Spencer for Prosperous? Okay. And safeguarding? Sorry, Prosperous. Got them wrong way around. Anything from you, Councillor Clements?
Obviously, the September the 29th meeting is the schools white paper with Jonathan Price, and to consider the schools bill and focus on excellence in teaching and high standard. And we've also got the highways infrastructure, which is massive. It's a massive piece of work that we are doing well on at the moment with Darryl and his team and David. But it is a massive piece of work and it is taking up a lot of time.
Thank you, Councillor Clements. Further down the report on page 25 or page 27 of the PDF, we're looking at the things that might involve cross-committee working. For instance, there's the air quality plan, and you'll see in the report it's down as something that health and care might be looking at, but it also has a bearing on Prosperous. I don't know if you have any comments on how that duplication might be eliminated. Councillor Pert?
I think there are always a lot of subject matter that could be health related. And, you know, in the sort of the widest view, that could certainly be true. And I'd be more than happy on this occasion to let Prosperous lead on that. And if health members want to attend, I'm sure the chair would be extremely generous and allow them to contribute. Unless the chair of Prosperous has a different perspective.
Councillor Atkins?
On air quality, I'd much rather see some real interaction with district and borough councils. When I've raised the issue of air quality at my district council, I get the usual fob off, oh, well, that's about traffic and it's all down to the county, you know, as if neither council can talk to each other. You know, it seems to me that rather than linking in with health, it would be much better if, you know, we obviously have district representatives, district and borough representatives on the health committee. I sometimes wonder about how useful that is. But having said that, it seems to me that in this situation, that's exactly what should be being done with air quality, because, you know, it's very often, okay, there's congestion at traffic lights, that's down to the county, we can't do anything about that. Well, we're really serious about dealing with air quality, then we really do have to drill down, not just to districts and boroughs, but also to town councils and look at it properly. Because at the moment, it seems that neither council talks to each other. And it is a completely missed opportunity.
Very good point. I think if we're moving towards it going into Prosperous, it's probably useful if, in preparation for that investigation, that discussions take place with people like environmental health at borough or district level, because they can contribute quite, you know, clinically to how the health provisions might affect the prosperity of the operations. So I think that's a good point, well made, and it might help to have almost a health angle put into that discussion. Councillor Pert?
Thank you, Chair. Just wearing my sort of Borough Council hat, I know that certainly Stafford Borough Council has an annual air quality report. And, you know, I think that actually many of the impacts on air quality are things like the pollution that comes from older vehicles, particularly buses in the area. But there is also a number of plans already available for those areas which have an air quality issue in any case. So I think that sort of ability to have a wider discussion with anyone involved, I think, is really important.
Okay, so I think we're concluding it's for Prosperous to investigate, but to ensure that the likes of environmental health and other health issues are considered within the analysis. The other one where we've got itemised potential overlap is between Prosperous and Corporate Review in relation to the Highways Transformation Programme and the AMI's contract. So I don't know whether we can divide that into two. I personally think that the contract itself is maybe a corporate review issue, and getting the best out of the contract in terms of its delivery is probably for Prosperous. So if we can separate it that way. You happy with that, Councillor Clements?
Yeah, Chair, at the triangulation meeting for Prosperous, I think we'd already agreed that anyway.
Yeah, okay. Right, so that's really to discuss the potential overlap. I don't know if there are any others that anybody wants to raise. No, we'll go on to item 7. There's nothing else on item 6. Item 7 is very much the month-by-month analysis. Starts on page 32 of the report, or 34 of the PDF. And that's broken up into 2 sections. One is very much looking at what we've got on this particular work programme. First section being, as I mentioned earlier, things like complaints, things like climate change, interest, and also equalities we've got on the agenda, and a further look at the LEP into the future. We'll have the closeout of the MTFS into the new year, and also a people strategy document, which is pre-cabinet scrutiny. So they're all the things that are in the first section, if you like. And then we've got a second section, which is page 36 of the report, 38 of the PDF, where we're looking at those things that might need more detailed investigation. So the whole aspect of digital, civil contingencies, which has been requested by the leader, and also the look at what the leaders board should produce, where we've been requested to look at that from the leader as well. Any comments on other information that we think is necessary in the work programme? No? Okay, well, just to highlight that there's a reference to data sharing being on the 19th of September. Obviously, that's now rescheduled, and that will be on the 5th of October in the afternoon. Any other comments on the work programme? No, if that's the case, I will conclude the meeting.